Kevin, thank you for being here with us today.
Well, good to be with you. It's nice to see you, Jesse.
You as well. So tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, what you do, and what you write about.
Well, from a writing point of view, you can see in the background behind me, my first book is called The On Purpose Person. The second book is The On Purpose Business Person. And then my newest book is Chief Leadership Officer, and I have another book called Fit for Leading. So my work is primarily around really around leadership of both individual and organizational leadership, specifically around the purpose of the person and the purpose of the organization and how to create the alignment and strategies so people can be on their purpose rather than off their purpose.
Absolutely. So obviously you've written multiple books, right? So you've been through the writing journey multiple times.
Mhm.
Thinking back to maybe your first book, when it was your first time writing a book, what were some of the struggles you faced that maybe prevented you from getting started, or were some hurdles you had to overcome in that process?
Yeah, I think let me go the other end, if you will, and that is I sort of had something stirring in me, and I think everybody, they say everybody has a book in them. And I remember a friend of mine had put together a little booklet on insurance or something like that. And it was really simple and easy. And I thought, well, if Tom can do that, heck, I could take what I'm doing and I could put that together. And so it wasn't this monumental task. Now, mind you, this was in 1991, 1990. So, you just didn't have the kind of resources that you have today. But nevertheless, I just decided that I was going to sit down and do this. Now, I was working, I had my own business. So during the day, I would work all day, and then at night, I was generally, before we had children, I was much more of a night owl. So my wife would go to bed early, like around 9:30, 10 o'clock, and then I would start working from 10 until 3 in the morning. And then I'd get up I didn't need much sleep back then. I still don't need much sleep, but I would get up at 6 or 7 or 8 o'clock and then do a little bit more writing, and then I'd go to do business the rest of the day. And so I found understanding my rhythms, if you will, and I tried to do it when I was at my strongest. And what I found for me at night, when I was writing at night, the world was kind of quiet, and so it gave me a chance to be more reflective. I consider writing my prayer time. Is sort of a way, it's a connection with God or spirit or whatever, however one chooses to define that. But I found that it was sort of this intimacy that was there that I was just trying to pull out of the universe, if you will. What are the right words? What are the right concepts? What am I trying to express? And so I sat down at night and I would write. And originally I started off writing longhand on yellow sheets. I just, back then I wasn't the best on a computer. In fact, you can't really see it, but sort of behind me, there's an old Macintosh, and I had one of the second ever Macintosh that was made, and so I learned how to work on that, and then I began to start typing it myself. I typeset it myself. So I did all of these sorts of things just to sort of get it going, and it looked like a cookbook, and so that was the On Purpose Person, and now, I mean, the book has sold 350,000 copies, and it has been number one on Amazon for nonfiction for Amazon Kindle free. We did a 5-day free giveaway when we first introduced the book, and 32,560 people downloaded the book in 5 days. So, I mean, it was kind of remarkable just to sort of go through that whole experience but it was really a discipline of understanding when it was the right time for me to write, because there's never a good time to write.
Mm-hmm. So you were putting in what, 6 hours a day of writing, something like that?
I probably was doing that, but I'm not really sitting there writing. I'm a scribbler, so I have, like I scribble things out and I put stuff. I still find I like pen and paper to scribble out some things, and then even though I'm pretty good now on the computer. I like the ability to just scribble out my thoughts fast, capture them, and then I move to the computer. But today I don't write longhand ever. I just never write it out longhand, but I do. I now am able to think and type at the same time. Where before my typing skills were so bad, I couldn't do that. So I had to write it out and then transpose it to the screen.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. When you were writing, do you write, chapter one, then chapter two, then chapter three, or do you write a section based on whatever inspiration comes to you at that moment?
Well, because I tend to write stories, even though I'm writing nonfiction, I tend to use the narrative format for the majority of my books. Now, I'm writing a new book right now called Tough Shift, and you have to say it slowly. And it's about going through change. And in that book, because it's my voice, I was able to lay it out, and I use Scrivener instead of Word. And what I like about Scrivener is I can jump from chapter to chapter. So if an idea comes, I can say, oh, that would be good for that chapter. Then I just make a note, dump it over there in that chapter. And then whenever it comes time to write that chapter, I can do that. So writing more of what I call a how-to book versus a narrative is a very different experience. It's actually an easier writing process because you can just sort of put a parking lot in different chapters. And then when you get to them, you can write them out. Where a narrative, you have a story, and I'm not writing great literature here. I'm just trying to take a concept and convey it through characters. And what I like about the narrative format is it allows me to argue with myself. So I can have a character who's the protagonist, if you will, and then I can have somebody who wants to argue it with them. And as a result, in the argument that's going on, the person is learning. Both sides of the equation are being sort of brought forth.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That makes sense. And when you're talking about narrative nonfiction, do you have literally dialogue in there of the antagonist and the protagonist? Is that what you mean by that?
I do. I mean, so I have conversations. A lot of my books are more journeys. So the person is going through a journey. They meet somebody. It's pretty typical. When I first wrote The On Purpose Person, I didn't know anything about the hero's journey or Joseph Campbell's work, if you're familiar with that, where there's a very specific pattern to things. But it was really amazing when I went back and read the book with the idea of the understanding of that. I was like, holy mackerel, I actually kind of nailed this with the exception of a little bit of changes. But that Joseph Campbell, A Hero's Journey, is a good format for that sort of narrative. It's the way that stories and great myths work. Mm-hmm. And so in my case, the only place I broke it is I had a mentor, but that mentor was really a guide to other guides. Okay. So that this man on his journey is meeting other people that this guide has set up for him to meet, and each one gives him a little bit more of the process of knowing your purpose and then living it out and being on your purpose.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. You mentioned at the beginning of our conversation that you felt kind of this stirring inside of you, that everyone has a book inside of them. When you were writing, did you ever encounter any imposter syndrome or perfectionism or any of those mindset blocks that were troublesome for you?
Well, I generally in life don't deal with that very much. Do I have doubts? I mean, it's kind of, I call it the Moses syndrome, where God calls Moses and says, lead the Jews out of Israel. And he's like, who, me? And at some level, there was this part of me that was like, I've got an undergraduate degree in business and economics with a major in finance. I have a master's degree in business administration. And now I'm writing a book. And the joke in our family was not in the book, in the acknowledgments, in the On Purpose Person in particular, I have a statement in there where I say, I want to thank my wife, Judith, from whom I never heard a discouraging word during the writing of this project. The other side of the coin is I never heard an encouraging word either. and so that's sort of our inside joke, and she allows me to tell that. But to her, we were getting ready to have our first child, and I knew that if you have a child, it's really hard to find time to do things. So I was trying to hurry up before he was born to give birth to this book prior to the birth of Charles. And so as a result, that's one of the reasons why I was very committed to working late at nights and getting up in the mornings and just really trying to make this whole thing come about. So that was kind of and then from the imposter point of view, I felt like I had good stuff and that it was meaningful when I was talking with people about it. So I had confidence in what I was doing in that regard. Now, I will say, since it's kind of interesting because when you become a writer, it's kind of like my parents were supportive of that. I have a brother who just would say to me, what are you doing with that? I mean, I don't get it. It's just, so you always have people around you who don't get why you feel compelled to do this. I mean, it's kind of why artists go crazy, I think, because it's a high-risk venture. There's no doubt about it. When you write a book, it's a high-risk venture. You hope you're going to be able to touch people's lives. Perhaps you hope you'll make some money out of it. I always tell people, don't write for the money. It's not that you can't make money from it. It's just that if you write to make money, book sales are really hard to make money from. Even though I've sold 350,000 copies, by the time, and that was originally, published with a publisher, by the time those dollars come to me, it's very, very few dollars in that sense. So you better have it either as something that you really feel compelled to do, or it's part of a business plan where the book leads to, for instance, the work that you do, where you're working with people and they're, very similar work where you're helping them work through transitions and changes in their lives, what I would call tough shifts. If you write, your book that you've written, if it leads to somebody saying, I read this, I want to hire her to coach me, or I want to hire her I want to go through her program. See, it becomes a calling card. It becomes a way for people to get to know you and like you, and it qualifies people to want to go to the next level, to meet you and talk with you and work with you. And so in that sense, a book can be a very good calling card. And I don't mean to diminish the value of the book, but there's both the message itself, which is heartfelt, but there's also, you can have your head in there and say there's some business stuff that's going on here as well.
Absolutely. And that's what I teach my people too. The authors that I work with is it's like, okay, write the book, publish the book, promote your book, but then leverage that to get speaking gigs and coaching clients and all those things. So I completely agree with you. Now, most of the people that are going to be watching this video, they are first-time nonfiction authors. They've never done this before. What
Right?
parting advice would you give them that maybe we haven't covered already to help make that process of writing their book easier?
Yeah, actually, I think there's two things, or a two-way process that I like to talk about. And first, write your book, just get it out. And then you're going to edit and edit. I mean, I'm like this Tough Shift book that I'm writing right now, which is really more of a booklet. But you write the book, and then you go back and you read the book, and you rewrite the book so that people want to read it. So first, what happens is we tend to write it with a lot of what I want to call I statements, particularly in the nonfiction or how-to world. And here's a good example. You could sit there and say something like, I want to give you the gift of knowing your purpose. Okay? But instead, you could say, having the gift of your purpose provides you with, it's a whole different, it's instead of it making it about me, where I'm the authority, I'm the hero, you're transitioning it to, and again, this is some of the hero's journey work that I've learned in retrospect. You're now making the person the hero of the story, and you're allowing them to receive what is coming as opposed to begging for it, or having to sort of approach the Wizard of Oz on shaky and knees and all of those sorts of things. So you want to make it as fluid a relationship as I think you possibly can. Otherwise, what will happen is, and again, if you're an authority and you want to be an authoritative voice, there's nothing wrong with that. But what I generally find is that if you've got a lot of ego in it, then you become somewhat unapproachable, and people feel they can't reach out to you. And so it can, again, depending upon the business reasons that you're doing this, it can have the opposite effect of what you want. Or this person doesn't get me and I don't relate is really what happens. Is I don't relate because they just seem to be all about themselves.
No, those are fantastic pieces of advice. Kevin, thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us today.
You're welcome.